Can I remind members that social distancing measures are in place in the Chamber and across the Holyrood campus, and ask members to take care to observe these measures over the course of this afternoon's business, including when entering and exiting the Chamber. The next item of business is portfolio questions on Constitution, Europe and External Affairs. I remind members, if they wish a supplementary question, to press their request to speak button or press the letter R in the relevant box. And can I call question number 1, Elaine Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what recent discussions it has had with the Cuban Government.
Minister Jenny Gilruth.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Following a request from the Cuban Embassy in London, Scotland House London held an official level meeting with the Economic and Commercial Councillor from the Cuban Embassy in London on the 10th of March this year. The discussion focused on general trade and economic priorities for both nations.
Elaine Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank the Minister for that response, and I'm pleased that meeting took place. But is the Minister aware of the support of many people in Scotland for awarding a Nobel Peace Prize to Cuban health workers who selflessly help countries around the world, including in Lombardy in Italy, which was badly affected by COVID-19? And they do so despite their own country being denied vital medicines because of the US blockade. So does the Minister support calls for the removal of US-imposed sanctions, and will she make contact with Cuba to see what we can learn from their successful approach to tackling coronavirus?
Minister.
I thank Elaine Smith for that question. I recognise that Elaine Smith recently nominated Cuba's Henry Reeve International Medical Brigade to receive the 2021 Nobel Peace Prize. The Scottish Government, of course, acknowledges the achievements and great sacrifice that all medical staff, both here in Scotland and throughout the world, have made throughout the pandemic. And whilst it would not be appropriate for the Government to endorse the Nobel Peace Prize nomination, indeed, I don't think it's something we've ever done before, we do recognise Cuba's excellence in training medical professionals and the humanitarian work this enables them to achieve throughout the world.
Thank you. I call question number 2, Mark Ruskell.
Thanks. To ask the Scottish Government how the provisions in its proposed EU continuity bill will stay aligned with EU principles on animal sentience.
Cabinet Secretary Michael Russell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government fully accepts the scientific basis for animal sentience and will take all appropriate action to safeguard animal welfare standards. Animal sentience has been implicitly recognised in Scottish legislation for over a century, most recently in the Animal Health and Welfare Scotland Act 2006. A newly established Scottish Animal Welfare Commission has a specific remit to report annually on how the welfare needs of sentient animals have been addressed in all areas of relevant legislation. The power in section 1.1 of the Continuity Bill is a general power for ministers to align with EU law where appropriate. There will be many factors which Scottish ministers will have regard to. However, should that power be approved by the Parliament, it will not be the only way that the Scottish ministers could legislate to align with EU law after the end of the transition period.
Mark Ruskell.
Well, can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response? I mean, my impression of where we ended up at the end of the first continuity bill was meant that animal sentience needs to be reflected in provisions in Scots law. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, in relation to agriculture, fisheries, transport, research and technological development, animal sentience must be paid in full regard to the provisions of these laws have to pay full regard to welfare requirements under current animal sentience provisions. But where is that provision in Scots law going forward? Is there not a danger that we end up with a gap between Scots law and the provisions within European law going forward?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the purpose of the Continuity Bill is to avoid such a gap, and in such an important area as animal sentience, which was fully accepted during the debate on the first Continuity Bill, then we will use the appropriate provisions as we can. I don't think there is any danger of this being ignored. It was fully debated and discussed in the first Continuity Bill and remains a concern in the second Continuity Bill, and the provisions of the bill, amongst other provisions, can tackle the issue.
Supplementary question from John Mason.
Thank you very much. As well as the Continuity Bill, animal welfare could be affected by the Internal Market Bill, the UK Internal Market Bill. Has the Cabinet Secretary had any assurance or any engagement with the UK Government that they will not drive down standards in relation to animal welfare?
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government has received no assurances that the bill will not have a regressive impact on such standards. Of course, the general position of the UK Government is that standards will be maintained, but of course I think we are entitled to be sceptical until we see evidence. The Scottish Government is clear, and this is backed up by the views of stakeholders across Scotland, that the correct and proportionate means of dealing with policy differences across UK nations after leaving the EU is through the Common Frameworks process, which, despite our strong differences over EU exit, has been able to make significant progress. And this includes, of course, an animal health and welfare framework. And the bill actually undermines and threatens that programme of work.
Further supplementary, Dean Lockhart.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. At the Finance and Constitution Committee, the Law Society, Faculty of Advocates and the NFUS have all expressed concerns over the inadequate level of parliamentary scrutiny and stakeholder consultation set out in the draft EU Continuity Bill. And all of these are significantly lower than the equivalent provisions agreed at stage 3 of the previous bill. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, why did he ignore the will of Parliament as expressed at stage 3 in the previous Continuity Bill and attempt this blatant power grab in the current legislation?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yeah, I'm always, Presiding Officer, amazed by the look of satisfaction that Conservative members have when they ask such questions, as if they have found the holy grail of questioning. What they've actually done is opened up their own inadequacies. And let me just point out to Mr Lockhart as kindly as I can. No, I don't feel particularly kindly after the experience that Scotland is going through and Brexit is still going through it. Let me just point out to him that on the issue of consultation, he should examine what the UK Tory government has done on the internal market bill, and then, to quote a former leader of the Labour Party, a period of silence would be in order.
Question number 3, Christine Graham. We may come back to question number 3 in a moment. I'll move in the meantime to question number 4, Joanne Lamond.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what contingency work it is carrying out to prepare for the 2021 Scottish Parliament election should COVID-19 restrictions remain in place.
Minister Graham Day.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish General Election Coronavirus Bill, introduced on Monday the 16th of November, sets out measures to help ensure that the Scottish General Election next May can take place fairly and safely. It also sets out a number of contingency measures in the highly unlikely event that the election has to be deferred. The bill has been prepared in partnership with the Electoral Management Board for Scotland, the Electoral Commission, the Scottish Parliament and other political parties represented in the Chamber. Parliament will be asked to scrutinise the bill on an accelerated timetable in order to provide surety to voters, candidates, campaigners and electoral professionals. Indeed, that process began this morning.
Joanne Lamond.
Thank you. I'm aware that the bill published this week gives ministers the power to hold an all-postal election. The Minister for Parliamentary Business stated earlier in the year that the Scottish Government had yet to conduct a feasibility study into conducting the Holyrood election exclusively by postal ballot. Recent postal ballot voting registration rates published by the National Records of Scotland indicate that only 16.9% of the electorate is signed up for postal votes, with one seat in Glasgow having as low a sign-up rate as 12.2%. Will the Minister outline what work has been undertaken to encourage postal vote sign-up, as this is an important issue of access to democracy, and what feasibility work has the Scottish Government carried out on a postal vote-only election?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, the current levels of postal vote uptake are in the region of 18%. The Scottish Government is working very closely with the Electoral Commission and the Electoral Management Board to build upon that, because it will be extremely helpful to have an enhanced postal vote element. We have put additional resources in place which we believe have the potential to increase the postal vote to circa 40%. I should say to the member, it would be highly unlikely for an all-postal ballot to be necessary. This is about providing an enhanced element to it. And in terms of developing understanding and confidence, there will be an awareness-raising campaign driven by the Electoral Commission early in the new year to raise awareness of the option of postal vote access. But in addition to that, we look to have a campaign to develop people's understanding of how the postal vote system works and give them confidence and remove some of the misconceptions about it.
Supplementary question from Richard Lyle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the Minister agree that the priority must be to ensure that next year's Scottish parliamentary election can take place both fairly and safely? And can the Minister provide any further information as to the steps taken to develop this bill in partnership with political parties and relevant stakeholders?
Minister.
This has been very much a collaborative process, and I commend the participants of the other parties for the positive way they have embraced that. There's considerable work being done, I can tell Mr Lyle, to develop the content of the bill and to have a consensus around that. In terms of the safety and security, that is being driven by the electoral professionals. We are listening to them. They are, for example, conducting a review of the polling places to determine what procedures would need to be in place to allow it to be conducted safely. And as much as conducting it safely, giving people confidence that it's safe. We don't want queues, for example, at particular times of the day. So there's a very partnership-driven approach with the electoral professionals providing the advice and evidence on the practical side of it, and Parliament here to deliver the powers that might be required to allow them to get on and do their job.
Question number 3. Christine Graham.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thought it had been nullified because the temporary card wasn't working either for a bit. To ask the Scottish Government what difference it anticipates Joe Biden taking over the presidency from Donald Trump will make to its relationship with the United States and Europe.
Minister Jenny Gilruth.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The USA and Scotland's relationship is strong and enduring. Indeed, Scotland has a well-established diaspora community in the US, with some 30 million Americans identifying as having Scottish heritage. Our countries have a bright future working together with President-elect Biden and the first woman, Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. Many of our policies, including our support for fairness, equality and a strong rules-based international system, closely align with those set out by the new administration during the recent election campaign.
Christine Graham.
I thank the Minister for a response. Is the Minister optimistic that with the change of presidency, that is once Mr Trump takes a tumble to himself, that relations between Scotland and the USA will be a beneficiary, and with President-elect Joe Biden a self-proclaimed Europhile, we have an ally in our continued support for the value of membership of the EU?
Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government welcomes the comments made by President-elect Biden on Europe, in particular his emphasis on the value of the UK maintaining a close relationship with Europe and the necessity of abiding by the principles of the Good Friday Agreement. So we look forward to working with the new administration when they're sworn in January, and welcome the opportunity to work with them on issues such as Europe, the free trade agreements and on climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. Question number 5, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government on what basis the Constitution Secretary stated that an independence referendum would take place in 2021.
Cabinet Secretary Michael Russell.
On the basis of ambition and democracy.
Murdo Fraser.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response? We are, of course, in the middle of a health crisis, the biggest health crisis any of us have experienced in our lifetimes, something rapidly turning into an economic catastrophe. The First Minister has made it clear that all her energies are focused on these vital issues. And we've just heard that the Scottish Parliament elections, due in May, could well be deferred as a result. How can the Constitution Secretary possibly defend diverting the resources of government into another divisive referendum at a difficult time like this?
Cabinet Secretary.
With respect, Presiding Officer, the member did not hear that we were discussing the postponement of the Scottish Parliament election. That is inaccurate, and I'm sure it was a problem of communication electronically rather than any attempt to misrepresent what my colleague has said. Let me answer this question in 2 parts. The first part is to say that, of course, we are solidly focused on the pandemic, but we must also consider how we rebuild. And I think today's poll on how governments are trusted indicates that the people of Scotland would trust the Scottish Government to rebuild far more than they would trust the UK Government. So getting independence as soon as we can in order to rebuild and to rebuild better would be a priority. But let me also just say something about priorities. The very, very small number of people who will be engaged at some stage in putting together a proposed referendum bill would be minuscule. compared to the estimate of 25,000 civil servants working on Brexit at a cost, and this is what Brexit has cost so far, of over 200 billion. I do think, to be honest, Presiding Officer, you would need some brass neck to compare those two things.
Supplementary question, Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Of course, for Murdo Fraser, the time will never be right. The Tory UK government continues to stand in the way of Scotland's people having a say through an independence referendum that takes into account the new post-Brexit landscape. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that decisions on Scotland's future should be made by the people who live in Scotland, and that the UK government's position is both undemocratic and unsustainable?
Cabinet Secretary.
Just as I indicated to Mr Fraser that the basis, and that's the question he asked, on which I believe the independence referendum would take place in 2021 was ambition and democracy, I entirely agree that the basis of the UK government's objection is certainly a lack of democracy and a refusal to listen to the ambition of the Scottish people.
Further supplementary, Neil Findlay.
I'm pleased to hear the would-be President's commitment to democracy. I'm sure that that commitment comes before his nationalism. But for the purpose of this question, can we put aside the timing of any referendum and indeed the detail? And instead, can I raise the issue of principle? So does the Cabinet Secretary believe, as a Democrat, that allowing voters choice by widening the options in any potential referendum is both democratic and indeed desirable?
Cabinet Secretary.
I noticed that Mr Findlay is debating within his own party the issue of the referendum, and I'm very pleased that he comes to this chamber to debate it as well. Let me draw the members' attention to the Venice Convention, which talks about referenda and specifically looks at referenda and recommends that there should be a clear choice which can be encompassed by yes or no. But I am delighted that in one wing of the Labour Party, and of course there are many wings in the Labour Party, far more wings than the average bird has. There are many wings of the Labour Party, but in that wing of the Labour Party, there is a recognition that democracy should prevail. But I say to Mr Findlay, you cannot qualify democracy by timescale. Either democracy prevails or it does not. So join in and support a referendum now.
Question number 6, Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what the impact of Brexit will be on the road haulage and logistics sector.
Cabinet Secretary.
The impact of Brexit on the road haulage and logistics sector will be considerable and damaging. The expected delays and consequent costs which will impact greatly across the sector, which is made up of small and medium-sized enterprises. There will be particularly issues for these companies in Scotland involved in the transportation of fresh and live produce to the continent. The Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Infrastructure and Connectivity recently met with the Road Haulage Association, who of course gave evidence to one of the Parliament committees recently too. Their primary concern is about delays to the movement of goods at border crossings. This will be exacerbated by an inadequate number of properly trained customs agents and the delay in developing an IT system to manage the documentation process. There is also real concern regarding the potential for an insufficient number of permits to be made available to UK hauliers and little progress on bilateral agreements with member states which will enable these businesses to continue to work. These concerns are compounded by the absolute lack of clear information being available to this and to other sectors.
Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you for that reply, Cabinet Secretary. A shambles, incomprehensible, nonsense from the start, sleepwalking to disaster, bonkers. These were just some of the comments made at the Culture, Tourism, Europe and External Affairs Committee by Rod Mackenzie, Managing Director of Policy and Public Affairs, Road Haulage Association, to describe the UK Tory government's chaotic handling of arrangements for logistics and road haulage once Brexit transition ends. Given the critical importance of this sector, which employs 2.54 million people in the UK and on which we all depend for goods and services, the abject incompetence of the UK Tory government and the likely disruption of supply from January, what assistance can the Scottish Government provide to this key sector in the weeks and months ahead?
Cabinet Secretary.
It is hard to disagree with the views of Mr Mackenzie. And I think it is only the Conservative Party which appears to be unwilling to listen to the views of those who are actually doing the job. The Scottish Government's working closely with the industry's trade associations to help to encourage their members to seek out what information is available. The Scottish Transport and Logistics Intelligence Group has been reintroduced. Their members include representatives from all modes of freight transport. This will be a vehicle, that's not a pun, for sharing information on developments and planning between government and transport operators, ports and airports on issues and risks. And my colleague, the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, Infrastructure and Connectivity, has also recently written to Grant Shapps to highlight concerns and to seek assurances that everything possible will be done to minimise disruption to businesses. But alas, we have no evidence that that is what is going to take place.
Question number 8, Linda Fabiani.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government when it last spoke with the Office of the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster in relation to EU-UK future relationship negotiations.
Cabinet Secretary.
The last meeting of the Joint Ministerial Committee EU negotiations took place on the 29th of October when the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster and myself were both present. I also attended an EXO preparedness meeting on the 16th of November, which was chaired by the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster.
Linda Fabiani.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. I'm glad that there are, in fact, meetings about preparedness, because it would seem to me that with the end of the transition period looming, the concerns of businesses in my own constituency of East Kilbride and beyond, businesses which both import and export goods and indeed expertise, feel that they've been left in the dark with no time at all to prepare for this forthcoming end of the transition period. Can he offer these businesses any comfort at all?
Cabinet Secretary.
I would like to be able to offer them the comfort which many of them voted for, which was not to have Brexit. But alas, that is not where we are. The Scottish Government is doing everything it can to mitigate the effects, but I've regularly said that we cannot do everything. I did outline to the Europe Committee this morning a range of actions that the Scottish Government is taking, and I'm happy to write to the member with them. For example, the multi-agency Prepare for Brexit website, hosted by Scottish Enterprise, does provide advice, access to sources of financial support and online assessment. Scottish Enterprise are also now proactively targeting high-value traders to offer support. And we are introducing a customs academy that will allow additional support to companies that export. All those things are happening, and there's a great deal of work in the Scottish Government focused upon the concurrent winter pressures, which will be, of course, the continuing pressure of COVID, the pressure of Brexit. There should have been a transition period which was rejected by the UK Tories, and of course the inevitable winter pressures. But this is a very serious situation we are now facing. None of us should have any doubt about that. We should all be involved in encouraging companies to seek information, but companies themselves, we know from talking to them, have also been focused so heavily on the pandemic that there are huge problems ahead.
Thank you very much. That concludes portfolio questions, and we will move on shortly to the next item of business. Can I remind members of the social distancing arrangements that are in place in the Chamber and across the Holyrood campus, and encourage members to take particular care when entering and leaving the Chamber. Thank you very much.